Hello viewers, today's topic is constructing narratives. Let us first look at the objectives of today's session. There are two objectives for today. The first objective is to understand narrative writing. The second objective is to understand the nuances of constructing a narrative. Before we try and understand a narrative, let us first look at different types of writing in English. There are basically four different types of writing. They are descriptive writing, narrative writing, expository writing, and finally persuasive writing. All these types of writing help a writer to express his views and thoughts in a clear manner. Apart from the different types of writing, there are various styles of writing. These styles of writing or ways of presenting information are cause and effect style of writing, compare and contrast style of writing, and finally division and classification style of writing. Each of the different types that we have seen earlier will use a different style of presenting for more uniqueness and specificity. As mentioned earlier, today's session is on narrative writing. Let us first define what a narrative is. Narrative writing is a type of writing that provides an account of events or connected incidents. For example, if you tell someone about your first day at the college or your first bus ride home, then you are constructing a spoken narrative. If you write about the same incidents, then you would be constructing a written narrative. Simply put, narrative writing is nothing but story writing. The main purpose of any narrative writing is to entertain and engage readers through storytelling. Since we saw what narrative is, let us now look at the different categories of narratives in English. There are basically two types of writing. That is, the first one is the fictional narrative writing. As the name suggests, fictional narrative writing depends on the imaginative events or incidents that did not actually happen. This fictional narrative writing can be further divided into different categories. This is depending on the story that is being narrated. For example, a fictional narrative can be a drama, or it can be a short story, or a science fiction story, or it can also be a fantasy story. Let us now look at a few examples from each of these categories. The first example is the Harry Potter series by the author J.K. Rowling. This is a fantasy narrative where the incidents in the story are made up and imaginative with fictional characters and fictional setting. Another example is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is an example of mystery narrative writing. The final example is Pygmalion, a fictional play written by George Bernard Shaw. All these examples have fictional story, fictional characters, and fictional settings. The second category of narratives is the non-fictional category. In the non-fictional category, the stories narrated are real-life stories and real-life incidents. This category is again subdivided into two further categories. They are autobiographies and biographies. Autobiography is a narrative written by a person about his own life. For example, if we look, this is a book written by a young girl called The Diary of a Young Girl. This is an autobiographical narrative that tells us the story of a young girl during World War II. The second category is that of a biography. A biography is a detailed description of a person's life written by someone else. It narrates the person's life experiences. An example under this category would be the book called The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell. The book offers an inside look at the great author's life, but this book is written by somebody else but not the author itself. Till now, we have defined what a narrative is. To reiterate, narrative writing is simply writing of events or incidents in a coherent and logical manner with the purpose of entertaining and engaging the readers. Apart from defining a narrative, we saw the different categories of narratives in English. This concludes the first objective for today's session. Let us now move to the second objective for today's session, that is, to understand the nuances of constructing a narrative. In order to construct or write a narrative, there are 5 basic elements that are used, and these are characterization, dialogue writing, the setting, the storyline, and finally, the point of view. Let us now look at each of these elements in detail. The first one is the characterization. Characterization is the concept of creating characters for a narrative. All narratives will have characters. They are also known as the subjects of the story. These characters can be anyone like people, animal, or even aliens. For any narrative, there would be specific types of characters which are necessary in order to create and develop a story. There are certain stock characters. For example, each story will often have a protagonist, that is, the hero or the heroine. They are the central characters in the story. Along with the protagonist, every story will definitely have an antagonist, that is, the villain in the story, who always opposes the protagonist. Apart from these main characters, there would be other characters like comedian or a side hero who help in adding an element of humor to the story. Each story will definitely have many more characters apart from these, and each story needs interesting characters to push forward the events that occur in it. Characterization or the presentation of characters is done by various means. Let us look at a few of the ways by which a characterization or the development of the character can be done. Characters may be presented and developed by describing their personality or by describing their physical appearance in detail. A character's appearance includes the description of the character's age, height, hair, eyes, facial features, clothes, etc. We can use different adjectives to describe these features. The second way of describing a character is through their personality, which includes the description of the type of a character he or she is in a story. Like a character can be shy, it can be friendly, or it can be nervous or brave, etc. Apart from these descriptions, one can also describe a character's likes, his dislikes, and their hobbies. All these give a meaning to the characters, and all these are part of characterization. Apart from a character's description, a character can be developed by 3 other ways. The first one is through dialogue. This includes what the characters say and when they say it. The second way of developing a character is through their action, that is, what the characters do and how they interact with other characters in a story. And finally, a character can be developed through their reaction, that is, how the characters think and feel in different situations. In order to sum up, a character's way of talking, the way they express their emotions, their fears, their beliefs, etc., all these help us in describing and developing a character completely. Let us now look at an example of characterization in a story. Mr. Dursley was a big beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The second example is from the Poisonwood Bible, where the author describes a character in the following manner. We wore our best dresses on the outside to make a good impression. Rachel wore her green linen Easter suit she was so vain of, and her long whitish hair pulled off her forehead with a wide pink elastic hairband. In the given two examples, we saw that different characters have been described, both in their way of appearance and also in the way of their personality. All these attributes sum up the characterization part of constructing a narrative. Now, let us move to the second element of constructing a narrative, which is writing the dialogues. Writing verbal conversations or dialogues is often one of the trickiest part of constructing a narrative. There are two basic ways of writing dialogues. One way of writing it is to summarize what the characters say, and the other way of doing it is to directly quote what a character says. And there are several important things to consider while writing dialogues. Let us look at these rules of dialogue writing. The first rule is never to use dialogues to simply convey information. Dialogues should help in setting a scene or advancing an action, or it should help in giving an insight into characterization. The second one is the dialogues should always do many things at once. The third rule is to use appropriate words. Word choice tells a lot about a character's appearance, ethnicity, background, and morality. The fourth rule is to use the correct format and style while writing dialogues. And the final rule is the use of paragraphs. Paragraphs are very important to the flow and comprehension of the dialogues. And while writing paragraphs, one needs to start a paragraph every time the speaker changes in the conversation, thus helping the readers understand what is happening in the scene in a very clear manner. Thus, dialogues can be constructed to form a clear and coherent narrative. The third element in constructing a narrative is the setting of a story. A setting is the environment in which the story takes place. Setting includes the information about time, place, social conditions, weather, and immediate surroundings. A setting usually helps in providing a backdrop for the story. It also helps in creating a mood for the story, and sometimes it often gives a meaning to the character. And in order for a story to be effective, one has to describe the setting in such a way they are at the place of the incident. For example, look at the given description. From where I sit on the steps of the meeting house, I can hear the waves crashing on the beach. The sun is hot, and right now I wish I was at the beach with my mates. While reading out, many of you might have imagined a beach. Thus, the main aim of describing a setting should be to form a mental picture in the reader's mind. A setting can be described vividly by using all the 5 human senses. These 5 senses are the sense of touch, the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, the sense of seeing, and finally the sense of smell. When all these senses are used in describing a setting, it has the effect of painting a picture in the reader's mind. We saw at the beginning of this session that there are different types of narratives, like a mystery narrative, adventure narrative, fantasy narrative, etc. And each of these types of narratives would use different types of settings. For example, a science fiction can take place in space, or in the future, or on a different planet. A mystery story can take place in an old building or a deserted town. Till now, we have seen the first three components of constructing a narrative, that is, the characterization, the dialogue writing, and the setting. Now, let us continue with the next two elements of constructing a narrative. They are the plot and the point of view. Let us understand the next element in the construction of a narrative, that is, the plot of the story. As we saw earlier, that a narrative is made up of a series of events or incidents. The way these incidents or events are created and sequenced in an order to create a story is called the plot. Simply put, the plot is all of the action that takes place in the story. A plot revolves around a conflict, and a conflict is usually a struggle between the two major characters in a story. Now, let us look at the plot in detail. Usually, the plot consists of 4 stages, and these stages come one after the other. They are exposition, conflict, climax, and resolution. At the first stage of a story, that is the exposition, the characters and the setting of a story are introduced to the readers. All the characters in a story have a past or history. Readers need to know this in order to understand the story better. After the exposition, where the reader knows the background of the story, one moves into the second stage of constructing a narrative, which is the conflict. In the conflict stage of constructing a narrative, the characters in the story face a problem. Often, a conflict arises when the characters in the story are against one another. This is the most important part of a story. The conflict or the complications affect the characters in a story. During this stage of narration, a sense of excitement and tension prevails. After the conflict comes the third stage of plot. This is called the climax. The climax of a story is where the conflict gets resolved. Climax is sometimes referred to as the turning point of the story. Here the story changes for better or for worse for the hero. At this stage of the story, a major incident occurs, and this leads to various changes in the characters' lives. After the climax stage is the final stage of the plot. This is the resolution. At this stage, we understand what happens to the characters after the conflict gets resolved. The resolution is the final stage of a plot. It is the end of a story, and it can either be a happy ending or a tragic ending depending on how the writer wants to end it. Till now, we have seen what a plot is, and we have understood that a plot is the most important part of constructing a narrative, and the focus of a plot would be on characters and the incidents between these characters. This is the major part in constructing a narrative, because this is the stage where a reader connects to the story. A reader would be able to understand the meaning or get the moral of the story directly or indirectly that is being conveyed by the writer. The final part of constructing a narrative is the point of view of a story. Point of view refers to who is telling the story. There are two basic ways of narrating a story. The first one is the first person point of view. It means that the narrator is the part of a story. He or she narrates the story from their point of view. First person pronouns like I, we, me, our, etc. are used throughout the narration. When this point of view is used, a narrator usually gives the readers an insight into all the characters' thoughts and feelings. The second way of narrating a story is the third person point of view. In this view, the narrator is not a character, but he or she lets us know exactly how the characters think and feel. This third person point of view is again subdivided into 3 points of view. The first one is the limited point of view. The second one is the omniscient point of view. And the third one is the objective point of view. In the limited third person point of view, the narration is confined to what is experienced or felt by a single character, or at most a limited number of characters in a story. Every character's feelings are not described. In the second subcategory, which is the omniscient point of view, the narrator knows everything. He or she is well aware of all the characters' thoughts, feelings, and their motives in the story. In this type of narration, a writer uses pronouns such as he, she, him, her, they, etc. The third point of view is the objective narration, which includes the narration of only incidents as they take place. Unlike the other two, where we get an insight into the characters' thoughts and feelings, in this point of view, the reader doesn't get an insight into the character's feelings or thoughts. And that ends the point of view. Now that we have reached the end of this session, let us have a quick glance at the main points in the session. Firstly, the session started off by defining narrative writing, which simply put is a story told in written format. From defining narrative, we moved to discuss the different types of narratives. Finally, we have discussed the nuances of constructing a narrative, which described in detail the various elements that are used in constructing a narrative. This brings us to the end of this session. Thank you.